Welcome to BBC News. Are we about to see a war between Hezbollah and Israel? What is Hezbollah? Why is Israel attacking Lebanon? All of those questions are being searched online tens of thousands of times. Questions we'll attempt to answer in the next half an hour. And here on BBC News, we're also going to try to unravel and analyse an extraordinary last 7 days in the Middle East, from exploding pagers and walkie-talkies to Israel opening up a new phase in the conflict. So, let me bring in my expert BBC colleagues. Let me first introduce Lina Sinjab, who's our correspondent, been doing loads of BBC Live reporting from Lebanon's capital city, Beirut. In Jerusalem, we have Daniel Simone, who has been bringing us the latest updates on the ground in Israel during this ongoing conflict. And here in London, our correspondent, Frank Gardner. He's an expert in spying, security and world news. And Lyce, Douset, she's our chief international correspondent with decades of experience reporting from conflict zones around the world. So thank you all for being here with me over the next little while. Let's get to it. Let's go to Lina first of all. And Lina, it has been an extraordinary day so far where you are. Just give me a sense of the mood of it over the last few hours.
Well, I don't know if the guest can hear, the audience can hear the ambulances around me. It's a terrible day here in the country, and also we feel it here in Beirut. Hundreds of airstrikes that took place in southern Lebanon, pushing hundreds of thousands of civilians out of their homes. The latest figures that the Ministry of Health have given is that over 182 people killed, including women, children and paramedics, and more than 700 injured so far. And these figures are likely to rise in the coming hours. As you know, the rescue operation is still ongoing. Hospitals are running to receive all the injured. And also, we've heard reports from the government here that they're opening schools in Lebanon, here in Beirut, as shelters for the families fleeing the war.
Lina, even as you speak, the Lebanese Health Ministry has updated the figures, saying 274 people have now been killed in events today. So you get a sense of just how fast-moving things are on the ground and how changing it is. Let's go to Jerusalem and Daniel. Just give us a sense, Daniel, from where you are, of what the Israelis are saying they're trying to do here.
The Israeli military and government has set out a goal, which is to return home 60,000 Israelis in the north of the country who've been displaced by Hezbollah rocket fire. And they say they're doing that by targeting Hezbollah infrastructure, missiles, rockets. And this morning they announced that they were going to carry out a very extensive bombing campaign in southern Lebanon, and they warned people living in villages in southern Lebanon to leave and get out if they lived near places where Hezbollah was storing weapons. Obviously, they didn't specify which villages, and I think people there would have felt like they didn't know where they were being asked to go or whether their villages would actually be targeted. Then they announced a bit later in the day they were also going to be carrying out a similarly extensive bombing campaign in the Bekaa Valley, which is in northeast Lebanon. And just recently, just within the last few minutes, they've announced, the Israeli military, that they've struck around 800 targets today so far.
Frank, let me bring you in, because you have watched right since October the 7th, but an extraordinary last 7 days. Just how close are we to the all-out war that people have talked about for months as being the option that they feared most?
It's not inevitable, and there are very good reasons for both sides to be constrained from a full-on war. We've marched up to the precipice before. I think in April it looked really close to being a much wider scale war that drew in Iran and the US and others. So there was that Israeli airstrike on the Iranian consulate in Damascus, which resulted a few days later in the massive Iranian response of barrage of 300 missiles and drones on Israel. Things looked very serious then, but they managed to march both sides down from the brink. In this particular case, it's a case of who blinks first. And Israel is clearly hoping to so degrade Hezbollah's ability to hit it that Hezbollah essentially sues for peace. What Israel wants is a ceasefire deal that sticks. at the end of the 2006 full-scale war that they did fight, there was a UN resolution that it stipulated that Hezbollah had to stay north of the Litani River, which is about 30 kilometres north of the border. It didn't. It crept south, and subsequently there have been an exchange of fire across the border. So we're not at the no turning point yet, but they are ratcheting further and further up, and there's a lot more damage both sides could do to the other.
That tees up nicely for a question from Nora. So let me just read that out to you. And Nora has said, what is the fundamental reason for the war, and what has Lebanon got to do with it? Lyce, why don't you take that one?
I think what does Lebanon have to do with it is a question that's been asked by Lebanese from October the 8th, when we began to see this escalatory spiral, which has now reached its highest point on the ladder than it has been in nearly a year. But Hezbollah, which emerged out of the civil war in Lebanon and the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, is a state within a state now. It is a political force with members in the parliament. It is also a heavily armed military organization, non-state. It's called non-state military organization, much more powerful than the Lebanese military. And the Lebanese government really cannot stop it and sees itself very helpless in the midst of these rising tensions.
Frank, as well as the individual questions we've had in, our teams have actually been going through the various searches that people are doing, and thousands upon thousands of searches, asking a really straightforward question: what is Hezbollah?
Well, literally in Arabic, it means party of God. It was founded back in 1982 in the wake of Israel's invasion of Lebanon, which drove out the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, but it got replaced by this Iran-backed, at the time, a proxy militia. It was Iran exporting its Islamic revolution after the fall of the Shah. And Hezbollah started out very much as this nascent cell planted by Iran amongst Lebanese society, amongst its Shiite followers. And it's grown into this extremely powerful, effective, well-armed, well-trained force that is nevertheless a prescribed terrorist organization by the UK, US and other governments. But it's got a huge arsenal of missiles, which Israel is currently trying to degrade. These are things which Israel says are hidden in people's houses, in their garages, in underground shelters. And part of the reason they're doing these airstrikes is to try and preempt Hezbollah from launching all of those. The thing that really terrifies Israeli citizens and is scaring them about not returning to their homes in northern Israel is something that Hezbollah's got called the Radwan Force, Israeli citizens, and is scaring them about not returning to their homes in northern Israel, is something that Hezbollah's got called the Radwan Force, which is a kind of elite raiding party trained by Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is designed to go across the border and commit the sort of attack that Hamas did in southern Israel on October the 7th. And that scares the heck out of people who might want to go back to their homes in northern Israel.
Well, Frank, I've got 2 or 3 questions around Iran, and I'll come back and ask those of you in a while. But let's head back to Beirut and to Lena. And I've got a question here that's come to us via WhatsApp that asks the question: is Hezbollah hindering civilians to leave their homes and areas where they live after the Israeli warning? And it's worth you perhaps just telling our viewers what Israel did earlier in the day, which was these texts and phone messages that they sent out to many, many people where you are.
Yes, indeed. This morning started by this panic that spread across people in southern Lebanon when they received these warnings from the Israelis, on their WhatsApp groups or WhatsApp messages or even on their phone, asking people to leave and be separated from any areas where Hezbollah is stationed, because Israel is about to launch a full-fledged attack on southern Lebanon to attack the Hezbollah. And since then, many families already started leaving, knowing that in the past month, since October the 8th or October the 7th, and since the cross-border violence started, many villages right at the border have emptied from civilians. They moved further north and they moved to villages and towns closer to other cities that are safer and away from the hostilities. But today, the expansion of the operation that spread, many big swathe of areas in northern, from the northern side of the borders, forced thousands of families to flee. They fled to cities in the north, but also arrived here in Beirut. And as I mentioned earlier, that even the government is preparing several schools as shelters for the families who've fled. We've seen that happening before in cities closer to the border, but now the families and those who are fleeing are getting closer and closer to the capital, Beirut.
Daniel, let me bring you in Jerusalem, because we had those Israeli warnings earlier in the day. Did they articulate where they expect people to go?
No, they didn't. This morning, the Israeli military, through its spokesman, said they would be carrying out a very extensive air campaign in southern Lebanon. During the video message that announced this, they did sort of show a map of Lebanon, and there were various places named on the map, but they didn't specify where would be targeted. They said that Hezbollah was using what they called civilian infrastructure, which I think is a reference to homes and other things, to store weapons, rockets, missiles, other things, and that they would be targeting those places. So they said, in a direct sort of message to people, they said, if you live in places where Hezbollah are storing weapons or live near there, you should get out for your own safety. They didn't say where people should go. And of course, the area we're talking about is a very large area. So you're talking about huge swathes of Lebanon where people wouldn't have known if their particular village or town would be targeted. And then later today, a similar message from the spokesman, which then said that a similar campaign would be carried out in the Bekaa Valley in the northeast, and again telling people to leave for their own safety. But there was nowhere specified where they should go. And as Lena says, there's places that are opening up in other areas of Lebanon to house people who are fleeing those areas.
Daniel, thanks for the moment. A question from Ryan, and Ryan writes in to say, how can Israel do such extensive bombing of a neighbouring country without declaring war? Lyce.
It's the history of the region. Frank and I were just discussing this when we came in. I was based in the Middle East, in Jerusalem, in 1996, where there was a similar kind of an escalation, a similar kind of air raids, similar kind of concerns about pushing Hezbollah back from the border, about stopping the rocket fire. Then 2006, as Frank mentioned again and again, they keep going back to this kind of confrontation, and again now to the brink of an all-out war. It seems to be war in all but name now, but it could be much, much worse. They could be targeting the cities, as has been done in the past, with much more casualties. Israel says it has a right to defend itself. It says that there have been constant volleys of rockets fired from across the border into northern Israeli communities. That is why more than 60,000 Israelis were evacuated from towns and villages close to the border. And now Israel has just put on its list of war aims, in addition to the aims in Gaza, that it wants to allow its 60,000 residents to return home. It wants to degrade the capabilities of Hezbollah, and as Frank was saying, wants to push them back north across the Litani River. Both sides accuse the other, but there has been a constant back and forth with more and more. And today is the largest number of rockets, of airstrikes fired by Israel into, as we've been discussing, into communities of Lebanon.
Frank, let's return to Iran. You were talking about it. Tell me a little more about the arsenal that Hezbollah has. And a question here from Gerald, who says, I wonder why Iran have not supplied Lebanon with anti-aircraft weapons to shoot down these attacking jets.
Well, they have, but they're not enough to overcome Israel's defences. So the suite, that spelled S-U-I-T-E, that Israeli warplanes have of defensive measures that will neutralise or blind those. So, for example, when the Israeli Air Force goes into Syria, which it does frequently, to try and take out the weapon supply between Iran and Hezbollah, hitting those depots and arms supply routes. Every time it does that, it comes up against Syrian air defences, but it's able to neutralise them. And the moment somebody turns on their radar, they know that they are likely to be targeted by a heat-seeking anti-radar missile, a HARM, as it's known. So the Israeli Air Force trains very extensively for that, and it's got basically more powerful kit than the Lebanese have got.
Back to Jerusalem and back to Daniel, because we've seen all day today briefings about the air campaign that Israel is launching, but they have been repeatedly asked about, is this the prelude to a ground invasion? What have officials been saying?
Well, officials have said that at the moment they're concentrating on this air campaign. I think that doesn't mean that there can't be a ground campaign, but I think that would be quite different to what we're seeing now. And I think Israel doesn't necessarily want to do that, given it hasn't always been very successful when it's gone into southern Lebanon before. It's stayed there for a very long time. When it's left, it hasn't actually managed to achieve what it set out to achieve after it's left. So at the moment, it's saying that it wants to degrade the ability of Hezbollah to fire rockets. It wants to. At the moment, it's saying that it wants to degrade the ability of Hezbollah to fire rockets. It wants to destroy the infrastructure that Hezbollah has built up in Lebanon. It wants to push back Hezbollah fighters from the border. And I think there is a genuine question about whether these airstrikes can do that alone, no matter how extensive they are. We've been seeing airstrikes, not as extensive as the ones today, but we've been seeing airstrikes by Israel in Lebanon since almost a year, really, since this conflict between Hezbollah and Israel has been going on. And that hasn't stopped Hezbollah. And as things stand today, Hezbollah is still firing rockets into Israel. More than 100 fired in today, according to the Israeli military. But I think there's going to be speculation about whether there would still be a ground incursion, given Israel set out its goal. And it's been very public about the goal it's set out to achieve. It said it will achieve it, and its military actions will continue until the point at which it's achieved. Hezbollah, for its part, has said it will not achieve that Hezbollah will keep firing rockets until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. So you've got two positions that cannot be reconciled. One will be right and one will be wrong if they keep fighting. The other option, of course, is a diplomatic solution to this, which brings a ceasefire. At the moment, despite all the urging of world powers for that to be the way forward, there's no signs that is currently going to be the way forward.
We were just, again, Frank and I took the opportunity of speaking together before the programme, and Frank has actually written about this for the live page. Can you actually achieve your war aims just through the air? And it's been a mantra down through the decades. We've heard it from British commanders, we've heard it from American commanders, we've heard it from Israeli commanders. We're not hearing it, as we heard from Daniel, from Israeli commanders now. You cannot win your war from the air. You have to go in on the ground. It may not happen here, but it may also be just a matter of time.
I mean, Israel made this mistake back in 2006, the war that both Lyce and I covered at the time. And the Israeli Air Force commander was very overconfident about this. He told the government at the time, we've got this. We can do this. We can defeat Hezbollah from the air. And after a few days, it was pretty apparent that they couldn't. The Israeli army the Israeli Defense Force had to go in on land with their Merkava tanks and their infantry. And frankly, they got battered. They got a bloody nose. They weren't defeated, but they weren't victorious. Hezbollah was waiting for them, which is why right now, in Hassan Nasrallah's speech a few days ago, he effectively said, you want to come and invade us? Bring it on. We're ready for you. This is our fight. We welcome it.
Frank, I'll come back to diplomacy in a moment, but let me go back to Beirut and to Lena. And you will have been listening to what has been discussed in the last few minutes, and a number of questions just asking that basic thought that is what we are seeing with this military push by Israel. Is it likely to make Hezbollah pull back as the Israelis are demanding? What is your feel where you are?
Well, since the start of this tension, and Hezbollah has been adamant that their position is they are standing in defense of the Palestinians, and they will continue launching rockets, which presumably they will continue doing so until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. However, the situation, they also, all the movement that they've done, it was pretty much calculated so that they don't reach a full-fledged war. Lebanese don't forget the war in 2006. They don't want to see a military campaign and bombardment of the city here in Beirut, a damage to the infrastructure, an influx of refugees into neighboring countries like Syria. So this is something that Hezbollah has been trying to avoid over the past year. But the developments that happened in the past week with the pager situation, 3,000 injured, dozens killed, and followed by an airstrike in Dahi, and the full-fledged also air bombardment happening today with airstrikes, Israeli airstrikes, over 200 dead so far. It will leave Hezbollah in a very difficult position if they don't stand up to defend their position, to defend themselves. But it's obvious as well that they are not in a great position, because any escalation from their side, it will expand the war and expand the damage in Lebanon beyond the south and beyond in Hezbollah-controlled areas.
Lina, thanks very much. Frank, let me bring you in, because there was a very interesting report overnight from Axios in the United States, quoting US officials saying US officials recognise Israel's de-escalation through escalation rationale and agree with it, but stresses an extremely difficult calibration. That phrase, escalation to de-escalate, that is almost a somersault of rationale, isn't it?
It is, and it's something that is just to go at a slight tangent here, it's in the Russian order of battle, or BAT. The idea that is ingrained in the Russian military psyche, that if you're not doing very well and you need to move things along a bit, you go up massively. You perhaps use tactical nuclear weapons in order to calm everything down and achieve your result. Well, in this particular case, Israel is clearly hoping to send such a powerful message to Hezbollah in their words or their minds, that Hezbollah is somehow going to cave in and blink and agree to a ceasefire. I don't see that happening. And let's not forget Gaza here, because this all kicked off on October the 8th, as Lyce mentioned, when Hezbollah started firing weapons into northern Israel in what they say is solidarity with their Palestinian brethren in Gaza. Now, if there is a ceasefire in Gaza, the temperature on this northern border will drop immediately. And that's why you've got Bill Burns, the head of the CIA, working with the Egyptians, the Qataris, to try to get the last 10 yards of this ceasefire over the line, and it hasn't worked.
But let me bring Lyce on that, because exactly on the ceasefire, Frank is right, these are all totally intertwined as issues. But the White House on Friday had to put out a statement that they're still working on a ceasefire. They haven't forgotten about the ceasefire. It just underlined and demonstrated how almost that has been overtaken by events.
Yes, and there is discussion about why did this happen now? Why is the attention, both diplomatic as well as the attention of Israel's military machine, now focused on the north rather than on what is happening in Gaza? Although, as Frank says, the fighting is continuing. The suffering of Palestinians worsens by the day. The agony of the families, knowing that the hostages are, some of them are the fate of the hostages. Their ability to come out alive diminishes by the day. Is it a distraction? Prime Minister Netanyahu would say, no, this has always been part of our war aims. But I think it's been really clear that for President Biden, getting a deal in Gaza, he sees it as part of his legacy. He's only got a few months more. And also, it matters a lot to America, to the region, to Israel. And as Frank said, the Houthis say they will stop firing. The Hezbollah say they will stop firing. Iran says this is because of the Gaza ceasefire. Some would say, no, it's going to continue, but it would help a lot to bring down the temperature.
I'm into the last 2 minutes of the programme, so really brief as we go round. A quick final thought. Lena, to you, first of all.
Down the temperature.
I'm into the last 2 minutes of the programme, so really brief as we go round. A quick final thought. Lena, to you, first of all. How scared are people with all of this talk about an all-out war? We've seen what we've seen today. Give me a sense of the mood of the people all around you talking to you.
I think people are exhausted, are scared, but are also very much angry from this aggression that is happening on Lebanon. They've said it repeatedly, they want to live in peace, but they also want to see Palestinians, especially in Gaza, civilians living in peace.
Let me bring Daniel in. Just a final thought there about the timeline that you expect over the next few days and weeks.
It's very hard to say. The Israeli government's been very plain about its goal. It's said it's going to achieve that, and it's going to continue with these military actions until it achieves it. That simply means, as far as I can see, that we'll keep seeing significant military activity until the point in which they feel that they've met that goal. And it's very hard to see how long that would take. We've spoken about the possibility of a ground invasion. That is clearly on the table. So it's just very hard, but just the feeling here is what next, to be honest with you.
Frank, 20 seconds, because Hezbollah are saying today or over the weekend their campaign is open-ended.
And it is. They've got enormous resilience. They're not going to be defeated by military power alone.
And the military says easy to get in, very hard to get out.
Well, you've brought us to the end of our programme. I'd like to thank all of you for being here with us, going through so many of those questions, answering them both from Lena there in Beirut, thanks to you, to Daniel in Jerusalem, thanks to you, and Frank and Lyce here in the studio. Thanks so much for being with us and giving us all of that analysis and context. Do head to the BBC website. There is a live page constantly running in terms of the latest events on the ground. Thanks for
Hello. The weather is continuing to cause some significant disruption out there. We've got some intense rainfall that is leading to flooding problems for some across parts of central and southern England in particular. Here's the radar from the past few hours showing where we've had the heaviest of the rain already. It's been particularly persistent for parts of central southern England here, where we do have an amber warning enforced from the Met Office. That's valid until 9 o'clock this evening for the likes of Bristol, Northampton as well. We've already seen some severe flooding, and I think it's not going to improve in a hurry as that rainfall just continues to be persistent and slow moving. So all down to this area of low pressure. Eventually it will start to ease away towards the east as we head through into the evening hours. But we've certainly got another few hours of rainfall across the region. Also some wet weather for parts of northern England, far north of Scotland too. But elsewhere some drier conditions as we head through this evening and overnight as well. A lot of cloud through the UK tonight, so we're not going to be seeing a particularly chilly night. Temperatures holding up between about 8 to 13 degrees to start your Tuesday morning. Now, Tuesday's weather does improve, certainly compared to today, as that low pressure clears towards the east. Still a bit of early rainfall for parts of East Anglia and the southeast. More wet weather moving in across northern and eastern parts of Scotland, where it's also going to be quite breezy as well. But for the rest of the UK, sunny spells, a few showers around. Certainly not as heavy or as frequent as we've seen over the past few days. Top temperatures between about 10 to 18 degrees north to south on Tuesday. Looking towards the middle of the week, then we've got another area of low pressure on the way, this time approaching from the southwest. So a bit of uncertainty about exactly when and where we're going to be seeing that rainfall by Wednesday, but it does look like eventually it'll start to temporarily wet across parts of southern England. The breeze will certainly pick up through the English Channel as well. The rest of the UK having a little bit of a better day, so some sunshine, perhaps the odd shower around. Starting to feel a bit cooler though for northern areas, particularly around about 10 to 13 degrees, and in the south about 16 or 17. But all that wet weather gradually shifts its way a little bit further north. So as we move through the overnight period and through Thursday now, it looks like much of England and Wales will see further spells of fairly heavy rains, gusty winds around some of that wet weather. Scotland and Northern Ireland probably faring a little bit better with sunny spells and scattered showers. 11 to 16 degrees by Thursday, so those temperatures gradually coming down, I think, through the course of the week. By the end of the week, it looks like the worst of the rainfall will tend to ease away, but those temperatures on the cool side. Bye-bye.
You get scared? No, I don't get scared. I've covered many wars over many years.
It bothers me to think about North Korean surveillance. Anything left on a shred of paper or my laptop, could it put somebody else's life at risk?
It was always going to be a history-making election.
This is not the time to stumble over my words. My job is to expose how people are targeted because I'm a reporter who can do that.
Behind the Stories. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Whether you're in Washington, Wisconsin, or even back in the UK,
we take you behind the scenes, explaining US news, culture, and the era-defining presidential election.
Americast, a BBC News podcast untangling America. Listen on BBC.
Live from London, this is BBC News. The Lebanese Health Ministry says more than 270 people have been killed, including women, children and paramedics, in the heaviest Israeli bombardment yet in the south of the country. The rush to get out. Schools are closed in parts of Lebanon, and its ministers say thousands of families have fled after Israeli warnings. Our other main headlines.
Here at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has given a speech promising there'll be no return to austerity.
Sri Lanka's new left-wing leader says he wants to restore faith in politics after being sworn in as president. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. Lebanon's health ministry says at least 274 people have been killed and at least 1,000 injured in Israeli strikes today, the deadliest day of the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict in the last year. Israel says it is broadening its strikes against Hezbollah as citizens in South Lebanon have received phone messages and texts warning them to leave places used by the Iran-backed group. Well, it comes amid speculation Israeli troops could also mount a ground invasion of southern Lebanon to create a buffer zone so that civilians who've been evacuated from northern Israel can return to their homes. Well, there is heavy traffic on the streets of Beirut as people rush to leave the area. These are the pictures from earlier. Let me also take you to live pictures in southern Lebanon, because throughout the course of the day we've seen huge explosions as Israel have confirmed in the last 45 minutes that they have now launched more than 800 different strikes in different areas of Lebanon. And there you see the strap on the screen.